Most casual viewers of sports don't really enjoy non competitive games. When one team is clearly outclassing another on any given day, most of us who might be watching that don't have a vested interest will grow bored if the game isn't close. That is, of course, unless the game is so lopsided that it rolls all the way over into good old fashioned country ass whipping territory. If a game is so one sided that it triggers a car wreck fascination, then it does become much more interesting. These are the kind of games that you can't really look away from because you can't believe what's happening. The kind of games where the announcers, people who watch sports for a living, can't fathom the proceedings. These are the biggest blowouts in U.S. pro sports. We'll start with the worst bludgeoning handed out in the history of the NHL. I mean, figuratively, not literally. This isn't a best or worst NHL fights video. We have to go all the way back to World War II for this one. The Detroit Red Wings were hosting the New York Rangers on January 23, 1944. The Red Wings proceeded to spit roast the Rangers by a score of 15-0. That year's Red Wings did have the second best record in hockey, behind only a dominant Montreal Canadiens team. The Rangers that season were statistically wretched, posting a 6-39-5 regular season record. The 15 goals scored by Detroit in this game is tied for the second most goals scored in a game by a single team with the 1980-81 Minnesota North Stars, who shellacked the original Winnipeg Jets 15-2. It's one behind the NHL record set by the 1919-1920 Montreal Canadiens in a 16-3 mauling of the now defunct Quebec Bulldogs. Every Red Wing skater except for Cully Simon, one of their defensemen, had at least 1 point in the game. The Red Wings scored 2 goals in the first period and 5 in the second. They then hung a snowman on the Rangers just in the third period alone by netting 8 goals, including forward Sid Howe, who had a hat trick including 2 goals occurring in an 18-second span. Detroit goalie Connie Dion only made 9 saves in the shutout, which is 6 fewer saves than the Red Wings had goals. Generally speaking, when your opponent has more goals than you have shots on goal, that's not a good sign. While the New York Rangers were on the receiving end of the worst loss in NHL history, their baseball namesake actually administered the worst beatdown in Major League Baseball history. Well, at least the modern era's biggest beatdown. Like with my worst seasons in US pro sports video, baseball has 2 records: the modern era, generally considered to be 1900 and later, and everything that happened in the 1800s. The worst modern drubbing of a baseball team occurred on August 22, 2007, when the Texas Rangers met the Baltimore Orioles at Camden Yards in Baltimore. The game actually started out pretty well for the Orioles, with them taking a 3-0 lead into the top of the 4th inning. But the game just went down the drain from there for Baltimore. The Rangers put up 5 runs in the 4th. The game was still manageable for the Orioles at this point, who prevented the Rangers from scoring in the 5th and were only trailing 5-3 entering the top of the 6th inning. And that's where the USS Orioles ran themselves right into the proverbial iceberg and started to sink. The Rangers scored 9 runs in the 6th inning. The Rangers only had 22 games the entire 2007 season where they plated 9 runs in the entire contest. They pulled it off in 1 inning on this day. And they weren't done. The Rangers were held scoreless in the 7th, only to push across 10 runs in the 8th. That put them up by a score of 24-3, which would be a one-sided score for an American football game, let alone a baseball game. But the Rangers still weren't done. They tallied 6 more in the 9th to complete the pummeling of the Orioles by a score of 30-3. And while that score is extremely savage, it isn't actually the MLB record for the worst loss if we include the 1800s. The overall record for the worst beating handed out in a Major League Baseball game actually goes to the Chicago White Stockings, who beat the now defunct Cleveland Blues 35-4 on July 24, 1882. And I'll bet right now you're looking at the graphic on the screen and going, but you said the Chicago White Stockings, but that's the Chicago Cubs logo. Did you mess up the graphic? And the answer to that question is, surprisingly and confusingly, no. The 1882 Chicago White Stockings history traces to the modern Chicago Cubs and not the Chicago White Sox. The original Chicago White Stockings became the Chicago Colts in 1890, then the Chicago Orphans in 1898, then the Chicago Cubs in about 1902. The modern-day White Sox began play in 1900, and seeing that the name White Stockings was available, took it. The media then shortened it to White Sox because saying and printing White Stockings over and over again would be a bit much. Not a lot of data exists for the White Stockings Blues game, other than the score and the date that it happened, in part because the game happened in 1882. I can't even find a breakdown of the score by inning. Next, we come to the NBA. Their biggest drought actually occurred just over 3 years ago as of the recording of this video. On December 2nd, 2021, the Memphis Grizzlies hosted the Oklahoma City Thunder and proceeded to shit stomp them by a score of 152-79. The 73-point margin of victory is the largest in NBA history. 9 of the 12 Grizzlies players that night scored double-digit points, and all 12 players who dressed for the game scored at least 1 point. Memphis shot 52.8% just from three-point range and 62.5% overall. The Memphis Grizzlies bench alone that night would have won the game even without the team's starters. Memphis's bench totaled 93 points, which still would have been a 14-point win even if you didn't add in the 59 points from the Grizzlies starters. Memphis scored 82 points in the paint during the game, also a total that would have won the game by 3 points without the rest of the offensive output. Short of free throws, I'm not sure there's a single component of Memphis's offense that didn't outpace the Thunder on that night. In that same season, the Oklahoma City Thunder had set the NBA record for the largest deficit in a home loss, having lost by 57 points to the Indiana Pacers. The 73-point annihilation set the mark for the largest defeat overall and on the road in NBA history. With the exception of the Cleveland Blues, who finished the 1882 season with a 42-40-2 record, the teams so far on the receiving end of these massacres were having awful seasons at the time. The New York Rangers only had 6 wins out of 50 games in the 1943-44 season. The 2007 Orioles finished 24 games under 500, and the 2021-22 Thunder ended the season 34 games under 500. The oddity in the NFL's case, though, is that it wasn't a team amid an awful season getting boat raced out of the building while having an especially terrible game even by their low standards. The biggest blowout in NFL history occurred in the 1940 NFL Championship game. Theoretically, one of the 2 best teams in the league got eviscerated, the likes of which have been seen neither before nor since. The Chicago Bears were playing the then Washington Redskins. The final score was 73-0 in favor of the Bears. An actual bear fighting an actual human might not have been as lopsided as this game appears on the surface. Washington had beaten the Bears 7-3 3 weeks prior in the regular season. Legend has it that Washington's players claimed the Bears were, quote, crybabies and, quote, quitters. Then the NFL championship game happened. To say the Bears may have had a chip on their shoulder apparently was a bit of an understatement. The Bears put up 501 yards of offense, including 382 rushing yards. The Bears' defense had 8 interceptions, 3 of which were returned for touchdowns. Washington's quarterbacks had combined to throw 22 interceptions during 12 regular season games, and then tossed 8 in this one championship game. They only completed 20 of 51 passes during the game for a 39.2 completion percentage. They completed only 12 more passes to their own team than they completed to Bears players. The Bears scored 7 rushing touchdowns, 1 passing touchdown, and 3 defensive touchdowns on interception returns, totaling 11. They actually failed to convert 4 of the 11 extra point attempts, or the score would have been slightly worse. Oh, and speaking of extra point attempts, the modern kicking net that keeps extra points from flying into the stands either hadn't been invented yet or wasn't in use in 1940. Because of this, the officials actually had to ask the Bears to either run or pass for extra point attempts because the game was down to its last official game ball. And that does it for the biggest blowouts in US pro sports. If you like the video, or have any other synonyms for the term blowout that you're disappointed I didn't work into this script, feel free to like, subscribe, comment on, or share the video. Remember to click the notification bell for more weekly content. And as always, thanks for watching.